I don't know. In a sense, I first met him in this conversation. I first met him in earlier conversations with you, but those conversations only made sense because somehow or other I had already met him for you to be able to talk the name. I had to have met him for you to ask me your question. It was an option to me to deny knowing him. And I wish now maybe that I'd taken that option.
And he looks strange as well. I think he's from another planet. And yeah, he kind of wandered in, slightly lost as people do, sort of wandered about. And we talked. And then he kind of wandered out again. And then one day I was working in my garden and he wandered in the garden, helped me in the garden, sorted out my beloved cloches, which I was nearly killing myself on, and stacked them all nice and neatly, and then wandered off again. And he wandered off with one of my little constructions, which I've never seen since, threatening to write a poem on it, which I remain in hopes of ever seeing. And then he wandered in and left a book of poetry, and then he wandered off again, and then he gave me a big hug, and then he wandered off again. Yeah, he is a bit of a strange character.
I think he wanted just to live a quiet life and live his life in his own way and according to his own lights. But circumstances, or maybe other agencies at work, brought this about. And eventually, like yeast in the loaf, a little bit of yeast changes the entire loaf, brings it to ripeness, changes the whole appearance of everything, and this is what happened with him. Yes, he was a revolutionary. It didn't start out as such, but that's the way it became with him. And he was I think the kind of the fulcrum around which events moved.
There never ever was an occasion when I was in his company and something unusual didn't happen. So that first time when we were in that room with all that regimental symbolism up on the wall and those plaques and things, the event was cancelled. And it was cancelled because of this enormous thunderstorm that took place. And I think there were elderly people coming to this event, and they just abandoned it because they were worried about safety or something. And he went and he put all the stuff up, even though they weren't going to do it. He put all the stuff up. And then, completely unexpectedly, this big coach party appeared. But these weren't elderly people at all. They were sort of, they were middle-aged people, but they weren't elderly. And of course, panic. They hadn't been in communication or whatever. But he'd got it all prepared. And so he was able to to bring everybody in. And now, as I say, he wasn't supposed to be organising this at all. And yet he drew these people in, and they came, and everybody, it was all kind of very orderly, and people kind of sat down, they were very quiet and very expectant. But there was no entertainment there for them. The lights were there, the music was all set up, the room was ready. I mean, not in this room with the regimental symbols, that was just a back room. There was a sort of large, rather sort of musty sort of theatre area that he'd got all prepared. And as I say, this kind of unexpected audience appeared, and they just sat there and waited. And it was as if the people that I knew, whose names I can't remember anymore, were just kind of paralysed by it. They just could not respond to this kind of sudden arrival of these people. Up to that moment, it was like, this is going to be like a miracle. He's going to suddenly, it'll turn out that he's organised the performers, or he can do all these tricks or something. And it just turned out that he couldn't, that for all this kind of laying everything out and for putting everything on, he was just as flummoxed as they were. And it was like that there was this fantastic sort of almost prophetic kind of, he could almost see the future about to happen. But when the future arrived, he was just as hopeless as everybody else.
Yeah, once I went to a conference that he gave about his work. I mean, I'm not a mathematician, so I didn't get very much of it, I must say. But it sounded very interesting. But he had written on the acetate paper with an old pen, and you could see how at the beginning the formulas, they were green, and at the end, I mean, the color was fading, and eventually you could almost not read anything. And I was surprised, because usually at conferences, well, people use PowerPoint or either type with a computer, they type the formulas, or with a program called LaTeX. And he had done everything by hand. That sounded very unprofessional. Sounded more like an artist, but I don't know, it didn't fit the conference. And well, that sounded unprofessional, but he's a great scientist.
He told me he was a mechanic, and I said, a mechanic? As in cars? And he laughed and he said, there are many forms of mechanics. And I said, do you work with engines? Again, he laughed and he said, mechanics is everything. To most people, a photo is literally a piece of paper with a picture. But to John, it was the capturing of light. It was so much more. And he would say that if light is energy and all energy is the same, then you can capture thoughts, you can capture dreams, you can capture emotions, you can capture everything within that piece of paper. The light stays there. It is captured. It's captured within the silver. You slow light. Einstein said that light could never change speed, could never change velocity. John Clearwater said you could stop it dead in its tracks. And the artist, the true artist, is not just thinking about the basic rules of composition. He's thinking about the soul of people and objects.
Code accepted. We're in. Hold on. As soon as that gets to the red light, which assumes that one there, just going to start. The things that we'd been through didn't really help matters. I found out some very intriguing things about him a few years later. I was going to, when we've done this,
Thank you for riding with us today. Please remain in your seat until the door is fully open. There are many other exciting Ventura experiences. Join us again soon. And remember, in Ventura, dreams can come true.
And he was a good teacher, not just in the way of my wall of death riding, but in my life in general. Yeah. I look at people in a lifeboat situation. There's three types of people that I'll daff in a lifeboat. Somebody that would follow me instinctively and do exactly as I said straight away so that we're going to get off the lifeboat. Somebody that would be my equal, and we're going to get off that lifeboat together because we're going to work together and pull it out together. Or somebody that I'll eat. And some of them are only there to be eaten. And I'm still going to survive because I'm going to eat them. And that was how I felt that he looked at things. But it might not have been, but that's the way I characterise what gets you through life.
shrink tube. Needs to go on. You never really know what people are made of. It's only approximations. I mean, because he's or at least this is how I experienced him, as a big storyteller too. I have a feeling those stories, they kind of they were kind of true. So a bit like a fictional autobiography. Or like situations like, what would I have done if that had happened? You know, so they're quite, you never quite know whether it's a story or whether it's real. Being a storyteller. But he never really resolved it. So he just had to develop this feeling, which went either this way or that way. Or it's left it a bit elusive. But you couldn't really ask. Sometimes he would smile when he said something, and he'd go, uh-huh, true or not? I think he was his own little actor, in a way. Where's this come from now? Huh? How did that happen?
We were at an event, and there was lots of music and singing and lots of dancing going on, and he spent the whole time just looking at people's feet. I couldn't understand what he was doing, and I went to him afterwards and asked him what he was doing, and he said he was analysing the rhythm of the music, and I thought, well, how can you do that? And he said, you just come from this background where everything is written down on a piece of paper. If you want to analyse something, you make a physical object of it, and you divide it up into boxes and squares, and you draw diagrams, and then you make your analysis and you come up with some figures and statistics and so on. And he said, and you can't do that with this stuff. It's something live that's happening now, and if you want to understand about this thing, then you have to look at how people move and how they feel it in their body, and that's the only way that you can really come to understand it. And what he was trying to do was to show that it's something that you physically have to have inside you. Those things, it actually becomes part of your body. Those memories are part of your physical being.
And it was several years later that the Oxford University Dangerous Sports Club had seen this film and thought, oh, yeah, we've got to give that a go. And they did a tandem. There was four of them actually did a jump off the Clifton Suspension Bridge in Bristol. And that was a 250-foot jump that they did. He wasn't one of the four that did the jump, but I believe what he did was actually the night before, he did a jump himself to test out the equipment, make sure everything was going to work okay. So he actually did the pre-jump before the famous jump that they did. Is it worth mentioning? Oh, all right, okay. Yeah, no, come this way anyway. course, I think it all started back in the islands in the Pacific. It's a small island out there with some tribespeople on it. And a couple had a fight. Off they ran, his husband chasing his wife. And she ran up the tallest tree she could find on the island. And when she got to the top, she tied a cord, a vine, round her ankle. But as her husband was climbing up, of course, he didn't capture any of this. He didn't twig. So of course, when he saw his wife jump off the top, he thought, "Oh my God!" So as he sort of tried to save her, he went over with her. But yeah, cunning old lady had the vine tied round her leg, saved her life, broke the fall. But poor hubby plunged to his death. So yeah, I mean that was really what sort of captured my imagination, and thought, well, yeah, I've got to give that a go. It sounds just like great fun. So had the opportunity, thankfully, when I was over in Australia. Well, yeah, you can see me up the top there, as I was just getting ready to jump. And yeah, on the way down, it was an amazing rush, the sound and the noise, the air, the acceleration, all over in a split second, unfortunately. But best thing is you got another go for free, because on the way back up, and you had this moment of weightlessness, this sort of snapshot when you were just floating in air, and then you got another bungee jump for free as you fell down again. But yeah, amazing feeling, just buzzing for the rest of the day. Very good fun.
And he went out later that afternoon, and I think he went a little bit faster. He did 163 kilometres an hour on his skis, on telemark skis, and then went into a forward lunge at 163 kilometres an hour and destroyed himself. And that's one of the first stories I heard of him. But I have a nice story I remember with him when I met him later on, a few years later, after he was exiled to France from Switzerland. And we were skiing at Clearwater together with one of his clients. And it was the Couloir plus belle off the Grand Monte. And we started heading down, and the guide kept going down further and further through like a little S-bend, like a dog leg, where it got quite steep onto about 55 degrees, and skied all the way out. And then, of course, next it was his turn, and he took off, and one turn, and then, he caught his edge, and he started rolling down the couloir in front of his client, who was horrified because he was supposed to be showing his client what to do. And of course, he did 2-3 rolls down this couloir and managed to pull himself up, much to the horror of his client and myself, who started panicking, going, oh my God. Because if he didn't stop then, he was going to go top to bottom, which is about 300-400 meters vertical. He kind of just let a little giggle and said, "Oh, it's okay." And he wasn't boastful about it or anything like that. He's quite meek, in fact, and took off down this couloir doing 5-6 beautiful big GS turns through it. And this is before the new school took over, where you have big fat skis and everybody goes straight down. And he just took off and gracefully skied all the way down within a few inches of the rocks on either side, at 50 degrees, and skied out and didn't think anything of it finally. It's quite amazing.
It's all fairly decent holds up here. Just a bit wet today. Nice one.
You know, people back then thought you should have a proper job and a career and you were just messing about. But not John. He always thought it was great that you were living a life and doing stuff. Because as you get older, you've got all them experiences to look back on. And I think John must have had tons of them. You know, I knew him for a bit in his life, but you know, he used to tell fantastic stories, and I would have liked to have met a lot of the other people that knew him to hear their side of the story. Because he always seems to me, I've heard him telling other people about a couple of routes we did together, and he always makes you out as an equal. Not that you were just being dragged up there as a mobile belay for him, doing something gnarly that you'd never have led anything yourself. Never even tells people that you didn't lead any of it. He always makes out you did it together. So he was real good like that. I topped out this route up on the side of the Roof Glacier, and the weather was closing in pretty badly. And by the time Jim, my second, came up, we were ready to get off as fast as possible. And this guy just appeared out of the mist. This was the first time I met him. Just came strolling over big strides, and he just soloed some horrendous couloir and just greeted us and then wandered off into the mist again. I was very impressed. I was young at the time, and I got to know him a bit more on the glacier that summer, and that's how I got to do a few routes with him. And we remained friends for quite a few years after that, I suppose. Friends. I never really knew where he lived or anything like that, but I'd just see him from time to time out in the Alps or the Canadian Rockies or something, and we'd do a route together, and then I'd maybe not see him again for another couple of years. But he was always good to be around, pretty bloody wild, big drinker, he liked his whiskey, and well, I think maybe he was the guy that introduced me to whiskey drinking, actually. I don't mind a dram myself. Right, I'll get this gear stacked away and we'll get down, find somewhere to have a cup of tea and get out of this weather, I think.
I don't know if you know it, but there's like this stream that comes down the hill, and it gets kind of lost in the sand, never quite makes the sea. And I'm always interested to see if it's possible to get the fresh water to join with the salt water. And this one time, he was there, much older then, and the stream was close enough for it to be kind of like feasible for once to get the fresh water into the sea. So I started digging furiously through this bank of sand. And he stood there all the time, just watching, waiting for that moment when suddenly the fresh water burst through the last bit of bank and joined the sea. And he was so pleased. He was as happy as I was.
And he hadn't done anything, he just sat there watching me all that time. I think that's the happiest I ever saw him. It's the closest I ever felt to him in all the time I'd known him.
I suppose I'd have to go back to probably about the beginning of the 60s.
As far as I'm concerned, anarchy is the highest form of government, if it works. But if it doesn't work, you don't have... what a lot of people call anarchy isn't anarchy, it's chaos.
He was just something completely different to anyone I'd ever met in my life.
The society that anarchists would like to see has the laws from within rather than the laws imposed from outside. You have no need of outside laws because the inner law of your morality and your sense of awareness of other people comes to the fore.
So for the first week or so, we sort of tend to... We didn't say much. We kept ourselves to ourselves. We thought, oh God, we keep away from that guy. That guy don't, you know. It took us a while to work him out.
If you go back to the original meaning of the word, the revolution is turning. It's a turning of the circle. The circle is whole, as a representation of wholeness. So that when you have a revolution, you're emphasising a part that was in the shadows before.
But this guy opened up something to me that proved to me that I hadn't seen nothing yet.
He's more concerned with each person changing themselves rather than society changing. I think he's aware of a lot of sorrow in the world coming up, and he may be aware of a lot of changes that are going to be taking place, but a lot of those things, he doesn't talk in those terms. He talks in essence of our attitude, the attitude we should take to life, not what is going to happen in life.
I mean, I've met some really interesting people along the way, but the turning point for my life was that, really, and that was it.
Well, put it like this. In life, there's these things called Malthusian controls, and they're natural controls imposed upon a population, an animal or a human population that's got too big for its environment. They're things like wars, plagues, invasive species. They always happen. They're generally uncontrollable. Humanity has managed to control any Malthusian control that might have imposed its will upon humanity as a species, because humanity is a culture that controls its environment in a way that animals don't. But there's a popular theory that suggests that the longer we control our environment, the bigger the Malthusian control will be when we eventually cannot control it anymore. And the kind of things they're talking about are the Second World War or the First World War or AIDS, things like that. And I can't help wondering that if Malthusian controls are natural events, everything in nature has a balance, and I'm wondering whether John Clearwater is the balance to a Malthusian control that hasn't happened yet. When you look at a normal person, all of the little bits of them that make up the body kind of move. They're all emotional at once. Their hands might gesture, their eyes might look around, their face will move. Bits of their face will move in different directions. This guy was still. It was like looking at a piece of landscape or or maybe like looking at a river from a distance where you know that all the bits of the river are moving in wild directions and strange motions, but all you really see is the ribbon that's the river and it doesn't appear to be moving from your perspective. Maybe John was a bit like that.
I just wanted to say something about time and memory and the relationship between the passage of time and, you know, that thing about when somebody dies, at the moment of their death, it's such a strange time because only a minute before they were still alive and then suddenly they're not, and yet you're almost still in the same moment. It's very, very, the whole world has changed.
Yeah, well, I don't know, don't know. It's been 15 years. I've been here for 10. No idea where he's been. No idea what he's up to. But I have a feeling he might be out and about doing his thing. Either eating pizza. Yeah, definitely. But not the cheap shit from the shops. He would really make an effort. Yeah, no, I have a feeling he's well, he's alright. Survivor that he is.
Who knows? Hopefully he's. I really hope that he's doing the same thing and he's rewarded for what he's done, because I think you should be rewarded for what you do in this life. It doesn't really work that way, unfortunately, that you get rewarded for what you do in life. But I think that he did pretty much. He didn't think too ulteriorly about himself, and he liked to. How would I say? He was just God, I guess. You could say that. I don't think there's anything else you can say about him. I could use all these wonderful superlatives explaining, like, amazing, brilliant, intelligent, charming, sophisticated, simple. He was everything, and yet he was nothing. And where he is now, I'm not sure.
And I feel that I've said an awful lot about him and told you absolutely nothing. You know, because the more you try to describe him, the more he seems to disappear. You know, in the end, you actually begin to kind of challenge whether you actually ever did meet him in the first place. You know, I know I did, because I remember the room with the regimental symbols. But it's almost like he sort of put that thought into my head. I don't know how he would have done that, but it's almost as if he could have done a thing like that. He had that sort of potential. You never saw it, but you kind of felt he could have done that.
Because this is when do you first meet somebody whose status is to have been a kind of mythic presence in different narratives, and maybe somebody, you know, the man with no name and so on. So, I don't know. In a sense, I first met him in this conversation. I first met him in earlier conversations with you, but those conversations only made sense because somehow or other I had already met him for you to be able to talk the name. I had to have met him for you to ask me your question. It was an option to me to deny knowing him. And I wish now maybe that I'd taken that option. Have I answered your question?